Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Koen.
Edo.
So, his name is pronounced Koen, not Cohen or Coen, as everybody was pronouncing your name.
Like they always do.
Yeah.
So, no problem.
So, welcome, and I am very, very happy to have Koen as our special guest, as the second international guest of Nelles Institute. He is the leader of Nelles Institute Netherlands, and he is also teaching the LIP and phenomenological constellations in Netherlands. And in the last month, or maybe last few months, I kept publicizing this event, and I wrote many times how many things he did and does, but it's impossible to remember. I didn't even try to memorize, and today he told me some other things, and it's like a never-ending story. Newer and newer things come up. What he is doing as profession besides leading the Nelles Institute in Netherlands, and this made me only now in the last month, or I think in the last month, I have realized what a big luck is this that you said yes, because I somehow, in that enthusiastic moment when I invited him, for me was almost, I almost took it for granted that Koen, if I invite him, Koen will come. And then in the meantime I realized that he is such a busy person, and despite of this busy life, he said yes. And now yesterday when he has arrived, I told him this, and he said, well, Edo, I gave you my word that I come, so I came, I'm here. So I really appreciate that he didn't cancel, and he's now here and can talk to you about his perspective, this phenomenological perspective upon some things. You will find out soon, and for those who will be here also in the next 3 days, I'm sure it will be a great experience to participate at the constellations. And just 2-3 administrative things that you can take from the papers you have seen. I made little prospects about our work, and I have brought also some books, some exemplars of The Life Has No Way Back, Viața nu cunoaște cale de întoarcere, the second edition of the book of Wilfried Nelles. So you can buy today, you can buy it with 50 lei, and you can buy it also before we leave. So I think that's all for tonight from my side, and I let you.
Thank you, Edo.
Speak.
It is a real pleasure, Edo, obviously Edo is a dear friend and a colleague, and she is a connector. So it is thanks to you that I'm here and that you are here. There's no doubt about that. So I'm very grateful for that. I had no clue about Cluj before, but I like adventures. So I'm very much surprised by the beauty of the city and the kindness of the people and the language ability of the people, that you are all prepared to listen to my talk in English. So it's a really pleasant surprise, and I'm grateful, Edo, to be here. Koen is not only a name; it is also a word, a Dutch word, which is similar to the German Kühn, and kühner Ritter, and means brave. That's the meaning of my name. And Koen is also on the picture over there. The small guy in the middle, not looking at the photographer, not looking at the camera. That was your observation this afternoon. So, and Koen is going to tell you something about being mature in an immature world. I'll tell you a bit more about myself. I was, well, not make the story too long. I'm 64, so it could be a long story. I started, my background is that of a lawyer and a psychologist in terms of studies, and I started my career as a Navy officer in the procurement department, and after that I did many jobs at the executive level, director's level, with a change mission. So currently I'm director of strategy of a city in the Netherlands, and I've been a secretary general of several cities, of several regions in the Netherlands. I've worked as a director at universities and hospitals. So we call that interim management in the Netherlands, and that means that you get a job for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months to do a reorganization and then go away again. That's one of the things I do. The second thing I do, I'm a leadership consultant. I consult to companies and organizations in terms of the development of the leadership of their personnel and their managers. I have a lot of customers in that area. And then the third and perhaps most dear activity is the Nelles Institute. I came in contact with Wilfried Nelles. You know how that goes, huh? Life, you are not looking for something, but something is coming to you. So I was in the waiting room of a physical therapist in Rotterdam, a German lady, and there was a book on her table. And I said, hey, that book, that looks interesting. And I asked her, what kind of book is that? And she said, that is one of the best books I read over the last years. And it was Wilfried Nelles' book. And I made an appointment with him for a bilateral coaching session, and that's where it started. So I think that I can say that being in that program, the life integration process, made me mature at relatively advanced age. So that is a pity to a certain extent. Let's assume at least that I'm mature. But does it resonate? Does the title resonate with you? Yeah, I see some, and a more specific question so that I know what I can do for you this evening. Why are you here? And because Edo asked me, that is also the right answer. So that's is there something that you're curious about, or do you say I'm a struggle? I like to be mature myself, or I am mature. I would like to assess my maturity. Is there anything somebody would like to say about why you are here? Just curious.
I'm working for a global company in Hungary, and I'm really interested in how this life integration process works in organization.
Yeah. Okay.
How it can be applied for
Okay.
life of an organization.
Yeah. Interesting point. Any other observations? Or shall I not? Yeah.
I'm here to learn how to become mature.
Oh, that's a beautiful and honest answer. Okay, let's try to enlighten you in that area, and let's also make it a very personal story, because that's more interesting. When we look at, I have only a few sheets. I put this model that a lot of you know on the screen, because it's not easy to put it here on the floor. We have to realize that the life integration process itself is also a phenomenon of the time we live in. It is not invented by Wilfried Nelles, it emerged in him, so he was the means of a awareness, a consciousness about the stages of consciousness, whereby the first stage of consciousness is the stage in the body of the mother, in which we are totally physically identified with the mother. There is no way of the child, of the small child, to know that he or she is something else than the mother. And that means that everything we experience through the mother and as the mother. So when the mother is stressful, the mother is hungry, the mother is insecure, that is something that the baby itself, the unborn baby, experiences. So the interesting part of the LIP process is that we have this stage before there is life, at least visible life, where things happen, where we experience things and there is a certain kind of awareness. But that awareness, at least what we know of, is a physical awareness. So everything that we experience is physical. So the way we observe the world is the imprinting in the physical universe. In the second stage of consciousness is the stage in the individual level of the child. And the core aspect of this stage is that belonging to a whole that is bigger than the mother, but is not so big, it's just a family, the core family. Belonging is the core element of it. So belonging is safe and not belonging is existentially unsafe. And what is interesting to realize then when we relate it to the collective of the society, that until we assume the 60s, when the individual development, the rationality emerged on a collective level, it was a bit before on an individual level with artists and scientists, that the entire collective of the Western world and the rest of the world was based on the fact that you belonged to a tribe, to a country, to a nation, to a village, to a religion, to a family. Belonging to a smaller or bigger group was the main way to be. In those days, we had a way to deal with frustration in this group, and the two ways to deal with frustration in that consciousness of the child in the collective was there was a God who resolved our problems, and if the frustration within the group became too big, then we started fighting the other village. So on the individual level, I come back to the individual level, the level 2 has to do with being part of this bigger whole than just the mother, the family, but still entirely dependent. This dependence means that when the child experiences something that is not nice, that the child has no choice to say, hey, let's look at another family in the village. There's only one way to deal with frustration, and it is the fact that the frustrations of the child is projected onto the child itself. So when the child is hungry, is mistreated, then the child will think, well, I must be not clever enough, not working hard enough, not be nice enough, not be beautiful enough. That is what the child projects onto itself to deal with a situation that is not nice in childhood. That means what we can all understand, that we have all souls that have been scratched in those years. I think there's only a small minority, I would say, I think 10 to 20% of people who have no scratches from those days. And why I put that picture of my family here before is that you see that was so beginning of the 60s, that was when the new consciousness emerged, but before that, becoming an adult was an initiation which went through the biological development of the human, by the women becoming fertile, and the boy becoming his first hard-ons and ejaculations. It was a way to come back to the system that you belong to. It's also here not long ago that when you lived in the village, then when you were in your puberty and you were adult, you started a family, and then when your father was a butcher, you became a butcher as well. So until the 60s, the dominating consciousness also of the collective was the group consciousness. I was born a Catholic boy. I was an altar boy also in my youth, and being part of that church, the feeling of togetherness, I have never experienced it in that way than in the years when I was 10, 12, 11. The feeling of belonging to a bigger whole with a meaning, with this religious meaning, was a very nice feeling. It was only in the 60s and the 70s that, and I think that is the biggest added value when we look at the constellation model of Wilfried Nelles, that adolescence, youth, emerged in an emotional sense. In a biological sense, it was already there. So you became fertile as a woman, and you became big. So in my view, a mature person was a man with a suit. That was a mature person, and a woman with a dress with curly hairs. That's when my mother went to the hairdresser on Saturday afternoon. But it was only in the 60s that we started to develop our own personality, the I, the ego. In art and in science, that was emerged before. When we look at the modern art of the turn of the century, 19th century, of Monet and Picasso, but mainly Picasso with his modern art, it was unconceivable before, 100 years before, that somebody, a person, would draw such strange pictures. Because everything you could draw was a picture of a man, or of a woman, of a situation in the field, or of fruit, of an animal, or scenes from the Bible. But the idea that you would have an own abstract idea about yourself and put that on paper, or in stone, or in metal, that was inconceivable. So we see that is only in the 60s when the I was born. The feeling that I was a person, that I belong to this family, and I look a bit like my mother, I look a bit like my father, but there's something unique about me. So that development in the collective led to everything we know now as normal. The music of the Beatles, pop music, was an expression, an individual expression of this freedom. And when I listen now to this music, I know this number of the group called Chicago. I can't recall the exact number. I will tell about it tomorrow. You can feel and hear the euphoria of these freed up souls that make music in a totally different way than they did before. When you look at the movie Jesus Christ Superstar, about the story of God nailed to the cross, and when you look at the movie with the eyes, fresh eyes now, and you see the vitality of the young people jumping off the bus, singing, that was an idea that was totally inconceivable before. So when I look now back at the acts of art, the expressions of art and music of those days, you see an outburst of vitality, which was, in my view, totally authentic. So that was this new freedom that emerged on a collective level. But what we have seen now, and then we come to, on the individual level, what I think that the LIP process is an expression of. I'm talking mainly about Western Europe. I know better but when I look around here, I think Romania is relatively similar to what we experience in Western Europe, is that we have found that we had this expression of art, of diversity. Everybody had different clothes. Everybody could look up his own clothes and clothing. That you see that this ego, I am so, I have to live this life, I have to dress like this, I like this music, I like this car, I like this political party, that you see that this ego is not sufficient anymore. That the idea that we have, I want to live my life, is not working anymore. You see, I have a picture about cars and colors, that the amount of different colors that cars had in the 70s is much bigger than in the 80s and in the 90s. You see that we are all emerging in a more homogeneous society with similar clothes, similar colors, similar colored cars. So we have become free in the 60s and the 70s. We have enjoyed it. And you saw also in the 80s and the 90s, you saw that the ego, the expression of the ego, didn't resolve everything. And I think then in 2009, this model was developed by Wilfried Nelles, because it learned us on stage 4 what maturity is. Maturity is not just this person with a suit, because he is now 1.80 meter instead of 1.50 meter and has a house and a job. Maturity is the step beyond the ego. Maturity is the step where you realize, can feel and see that everything that you have experienced in the phase before you were born, and that could also be a trauma. I work in China also. There are many women mainly who report traumas in the stages that were not born, because there was abortion as a real threat in their families, because in a one child family you'd better have a boy than a girl. So there are many traumas in that stage 1. That all the traumas that we have in our stage 2, which almost everybody has, that the ego idea about myself, how I am, how my parents are, how society is, or how society has to be, are all illusions. And then when we make the step to that maturity, we see, and you could also say that we draw a line through the 7 in which we split the model in a more physical part and a more spiritual part. We see that adulthood is the step to, as I call it, non-duality. Non-duality is also a part of our consciousness on stage 1, but then the child identifies totally with the mother. But in level 2 and level 3, we see that I and family is something different, and I identify to what I belong, but I can oppose what I do not belong to. So the neighboring village. You see that on the I level, we see a lot of conflict on individual level in politics, because everybody has to have his own opinion, and everybody has to shout out his own opinion harder than others, and there is no conviction anymore. There is no common belief anymore. So it is an energetic process in which every single person has to express his individual opinion louder and louder and louder, until we shoot out of the range that we are living in. And that is the feeling that we all have, a feeling of crisis, that, well, I am born, I have this okay family, I have found out now that my parents are not totally okay, they are old-fashioned, there's something wrong with them, I've found my own style of life, and now life is okay. I'm happy, I'm successful, and we find out that we are not. And in my view, the only way to make this step is through a crisis. Because the ego, and there is no paper here, but I always draw a pyramid, is that out of the perspective of the ego, when the ego looks back in history and he thinks of 100,000 years ago, when there were only small creatures crawling in the mud, and after that animals developed and people developed, but were living under a tree, and then you got culture and art and science, and the best part of of humanity is this individual person with his own mind and his own ideas about life. Out of the perspective of the ego, there is only a stupid world below, looking back in history, so the ego cannot come to the conclusion that there is something beyond the ego. Therefore, the ego needs a crisis. In my case, it was a crisis on every stage of life, relationship, work, no, health. I was spared for that, but relationship and work, I had many crises. That we need a crisis that is so painful that we realize that we cannot maintain the beliefs we have about the world, that we cannot maintain the beliefs we have about our parents, that we have to realize that our parents have done their best, that we realize that, okay, I have this study, but I didn't find the job that I wanted, that I'm not so successful as I wanted. And we need the crisis to come into maturity. And maturity means that we make the step into not knowing. Letting go of everything we have learned before. We had to learn before because it made us grow. It nourishes us in our bodily and mental being. But at that stage between 3 and 4, we have to let go of everything we needed to learn and we had to learn. This means when I am standing on the youth part of the gap, this gap is terribly dangerous and fearsome. When I let myself go into the not knowing, the experience that you have, and that is something about maturity that is, I think, entirely new, is that you feel, and the people who have arrived there of at least know the experience, know that when you let go of all your beliefs over there and you step in a not knowing, you feel that you are carried by life itself. And you feel that there is no duality anymore between what you belong to or what you do not belong to, what is good or what is not good. You realize that you're entirely alone in this world, but that when you are entirely alone in this world, this means that everybody is alone. So you feel that when you connect to yourself, you are connected through yourself, through everybody and everything. And that is the first step to non-duality. That is the step into that there is no difference between me and Edo anymore. Of course, in the physical realm there is, but in the spiritual realm we see that there are no differences anymore. That is the step to maturity. That is a step that very many people do not make because they didn't have this crisis. And you see in the society I live in the Netherlands, in the modernity of the West, that more and more you have, because the ego is ambivalent, the ego has no strength to carry itself. The ego needs appraisal from outside, that the ego is ambivalent, and that means that more and more you see that society, when we look at the collective level, is split into two parts. In the people who have done well and are convinced that it is their own doing, that they've done well, so they're very proud of themselves. They're successful, they drive a big Mercedes, they have a nice house. It's always the same, it's everywhere the same in Romania or in the Netherlands. So they are convinced that they live their lives and that they have proven that they are worth something. And more, that's the other part of society who was not successful, was not lucky, was not happy. And you see that because we have this responsibility now since modernity to live our lives, we see that a victimhood culture is coming up more and more. At least that is in the West. Because there is no other way to deal with my own responsibility. Because God is no longer responsible, or my parents are no longer responsible. I am responsible, and when I am not successful, it's too much to carry for myself. So you see in the West that we split the world in people who are successful and think that is their own doing, and people who are unsuccessful and behave like victims. So when this is the process we go through into maturity, then it's interesting when we're talking about how is it to be mature in an immature world, to look at what is society like. I have said some things about it. The individual process, I think that what applies to the group here anyhow, that is coming to the workshops that Edo is organizing, that is you have this interest in consciousness development, and probably not only that, probably you have a practical and concrete reason why you are here, to make that step. So you are advanced in terms of consciousness when you relate it to other people around you. But when we look at the society, we see that the majority of the whole world outside of the West is still in this level 2 consciousness. We belong to a religion, to a country. When we look at the conflicts in the East, when we look at the problems of integration with the Islamic religion, I say that in all neutrality, without any points to make about which religion is better or not. You see that many cultures are in that stage too, and that the Western culture is in this stage 2 consciousness, or in 2 consciousness, because when we look at the political system, for example, the political system in the West is a system of opposition and coalition. That's how parties work. You have the majority and a minority is against you. But majority and minority is just that level 2, that child consciousness of belonging or not belonging. That is the way that we lead our countries still. And you can say that because there are more parties now than there were in the past, that the individual dimension of society is also present in the government, and that is true because in the collective, what we see that with this individual development and rationality, science and thinking became the main issue of the modern society we live in. But we now see that we have created a society that is so complex. We have created organizations, you work at a big organization, that are so complex that we are not in charge of that organization anymore. We live in societies with big hospitals, with universities, with cities, with railroads, with roads, with that nobody is in charge of it anymore because it has become too complex. So we live in a society which is dominated by the child consciousness and the ego consciousness, and that is what everybody in this room could make relatively lonely, because that is the feeling I had, probably you have, about the fact that you feel that you do not belong to the group anymore. So it's not, you are not exclusive of the group, but you are not led by group beliefs anymore. You are not led by ego beliefs anymore, but the society around you is arranged around these principles. And that is the challenge we all face. And then the question obviously is, how do we deal with that? How do we deal when we look, for example, at collective problems, at climate? Climate is an issue that is a very hot topic in the Western policies. Is there a way that we can save the climate from the influences of our economy? My conviction and my belief is that when we have to resolve the problems of the future, there's only one way, and that is not through the collective, that is not through the ego, that is the way of the individual person into a new consciousness who relates to the whole in a sustainable way. And that is of only lonely people in this group and ego-dominated society the way to a sustainable world. And what we can do is exchange these experiences as a group, but the way to that sustainable world is only through the development of the person, of the soul of the person, with the talents it has, with the thing it has learned in his childhood, with the knowledge it has gained, with the context it has, and leaving that all behind and connect to who you really are. And that means that the paradigm shifts from I'm living my life to between 3 and 4 life is living me. So I will be bowing for life and relate to life because I will listen carefully to the messages that life has for me. And that is the step that the LIP process offers you. Perhaps a few reflection more, Erika, on your question about organizations. I think it was brilliant and very simple of Wilfried Nelles that he projected these stages of the individual development also on organizations, on the collective. And that is very simple because what we have done in our universities, that we have made very complicated analysis of how society is. But it is very logical to project the consciousness level of the individual on the whole. And when you look at stage 1 consciousness on a personal level, when we look at collective, we can think about, and then we have to go thousands of years before, when we lived in unity with nature. So hunter-gatherers, I think that is more than 10,000 years ago, they lived in total unity with the world, and they had no opinion about the world. Everything that they experienced was part of their being, their personal life, their personal well-being, a physical being, the weather, nature, whatever happened. The second stage that started actually when we started as farmers to settle, then did collective consciousness of the group emerged, and when we're looking back 2,000, 3,000 years, and therefore it is very interesting to notice that only level 3 is so fresh that we hardly start to understand what is happening there. And in terms of organizations, I know only organizations who are either hierarchical, which is related to that family child consciousness, or are ego-oriented. When you look at big consultancies, for example, when the individual knowledge of the person is used, and the way you are inspired is a contract where you earn a lot of money and even more money when you are more clever. But organizations that have this connection with their own mission and with the whole, they hardly exist. There are a few. You could say Patagonia as an organization who works a bit like that. There is an organization in the Netherlands called Buurtwerk who does social work in neighborhoods, who work a bit like that. But the point is that the organizations we have, that in government terms or in enterprise terms, they cannot facilitate that process to maturity anymore. That is a process that we have to make ourselves and can be facilitated by people like Edu and me. That is what I wanted to share with you about being mature in an immature world. So is your problem solved now? What's your name?
My name, Pavel.
Pavel.
No.
So.
Cured.
Cured.
Is there another way to go beyond the ego besides the crisis?
In principle, when we observe in a phenomenological way how life really works, we see that life lives itself. So when we see how two people, a man and woman, convene, when they have sex, it is not an egg and a sperm who look up for each other, I want that one or something. So life lives itself. So the way I find a partner, that is, sometimes we have the feeling, oh, I like that girl in my class or in my work, but mainly what happens in life is that it is a coincidence that you meet each other or that you like each other. The fact that you like somebody's smell, for example, which is very important in a sexual way, is something that you cannot organize. We try to organize it with nice smells, but we have our own smell, obviously. That when we are born, in which country, in a rich country or a poor country, with people, with parents who are very kind, who are not kind, that's all not our choosing. So what I realize more and more is that life is living us. We have the illusion that I live my life, but that's not the truth. When I look at the jobs I found, all coincidences, network. So that means that when life lives itself, you could also imagine that stage of maturity is something that life you live into. But the problem there, in my observation, and that's actually what we do all the constellations about, is that the ego defines the world not how it is, but how it thinks that it is. So ego creates a reality that is totally self-confirmed. So I have a picture of the world, I have a picture of my parents, I have a picture of my relation, which is created by me and is therefore always true. So I hardly see cases of people who do not need a crisis. But in theory it must be possible. Because it's just the flow of life that brings us to the feeling that we can be an individual at the same time, be part of the bigger whole. And that is important to realize, that because the fact that I define maturity as the first step to non-duality means that we have to go to the ego stage first. Because I have to disidentify with the family I come from and feel and experience that I'm something, my own person, and then I can reconnect to the whole again. But when I stay in this two dimension, for example, when I was in a monastery in the Middle Ages and I was praying to God all the time, am I in this mature consciousness, or just do I have an improved version of what the wholeness is? And my view and experience is, you have to get in touch with the ego to come into this mature stage. And it is in principle, it is a natural process, but what we see is that many people need the crisis of the ego to come there. But you're still young, so you can wait. What
about the last three stages?
Can you be a bit louder?
Yes. What about the last three stages?
Last three stages. Stage 5 is the stage we call that late maturity or older maturity. That is the stage in a woman's life where she enters the menopause, and in the male life, we are not do not live in a very military culture anymore. But in the past, when you were 45 or 50, you were not called anymore to play military roles. But you did it because you didn't have the physical strength anymore to play a role in the war. So that is this stage, the late maturity. Stage 6 is about all people, but obviously then in an emotional sense. So these stages mean, and what we see is that in this stage 5, I'm so connected to the source I was born with the stage 1, that it becomes more and more difficult to live a life that does not stem from this source. So you see that in the Netherlands we say, these older people, they are less flexible. But in my view, that's a very negative perspective on people of this age. It is, when we're talking about emotional maturity, it is the fact that you get in touch with your source, with the reason why you came to this earth, and want to live that destination. So that's is stage 5 in an emotional sense. Stage 6 is, and that's interesting that all these stages relate to 7, which is death. We are not sure whether life emerges from death or not, but we are quite sure that life ends with that last stage, death. And stage 6 is the emotional state of the old person. We call it also unity consciousness, in which you are so connected with everything there is, and so in acceptance of everything there is, that there is no opinion, no observation about life. So you perhaps you know these people, they glow, they only glow all the time, even when they live uncomfortable lives. And I think that is the mission that we all have, when you believe in missions, but that is the level I think that feels comfortable, that when you have done all your work in your personal development, that there is nothing more to wish for in this stage, that you're totally prepared to die, and that your last sigh is your own conscious and natural movement which brings you over the threshold to death. So that are the next two stages. And when we do an LIP process, because I assume that you're not familiar with LIP. No. Is that the core constellation of the LIP process is that we put somebody as an adult on the 4, and you choose representatives of your unborn child and adolescent. And then you look in the constellation, you check whether there's something left that you have to integrate. So we almost always start with the adult position, and people over 45, 50, we put them on the 5. But normally with people with no experience with the LIP process, we put them on the adult position, because the adult position is a fundamentally different position, is an autonomous position, which helps me to observe all the stages I was before, in which I was identified with something. In stage 1, I was identified with the mother. In stage 2, I'm identified with the family. In stage 3, I'm identified with my ego, which I consider to be a reality, which is not. And stage 4 is the first stage in which I can sense myself and at the same time feel connected to the whole. Yes, please.
What are the essential differences between a romantic relationship between two mature people and a romantic relationship with two immature?
Yeah. You know the stage 1 relationships. in the Netherlands, we always say we have a brand of, it's raining a lot in the Netherlands. So you have these rain suits, and in the Netherlands you have couples who wear the same rain suit. So green with yellow stripes. The man has one, and so they are not, their sex is invisible in those suits, and they wear the same clothes. So that is stage 1 relationship, a romantic relationship. On the stage 2 romantic relationship, and we have to realize that almost all relationships were like that until the 60s and the 70s. It is, I belong to you, you belong to me. So we are dependent of each other. There is no life without, I could have a different dress than different clothing than you, but we are totally dependent of each other. In the ego stage, the stage 3 of a romantic relationship, the ego is more important. So I love you, but I live my own life, and you live your own life. And when you say, could we do this together, say, oh no, this is I'm protecting my own autonomy. And that's the stage, obviously, when we saw in society that when belonging to a family and being a family as a man and a woman, or equal sex partners, that is no difference, wasn't important anymore, and the ego became important. That's when all the divorces started, because my feeling about what I like about sex, about relationship, about being a parent became more important. In the mature relationship, in my view, we see these two sides of consciousness on a personal level. We see it in the relationship. I feel totally connected with the other person, and we have to realize that on a mature level, I am this enlightened that I can have a romantic relationship with everybody. Because I realize that everything that we like to experience together is a gift, and everything that we dislike is a lesson. So on stage 4, I can marry my neighboring woman, because that's easy, and I don't have to look for a partner very far. But for most people that is still a stretch. But it is the combination of. So what I wanted to add, there are still all these stages integrate. So stage 4 integrates 3, 2, and 1, and it means that on a romantic level, I'm a quite physical guy, so the way my girlfriend feels and smells is a very fundamental way of my romantic relationship. But on the spiritual level, I can see and feel that she is free to do whatever she wants, and I still feel committed to her. So if she wants to do a thing with other men, I can feel that as my pain that I have to deal with, and not something that she has to deal with. So it's that combination of feeling myself as a person, be able to merge into a sexual act, and stepping out and feeling autonomous again. And yeah, as we can all experience, that is still a big challenge. So a relationship, a romantic relationship, is one of the best environments to work on your consciousness, because your ego is very much connected to everything that you feel. Be connected to the most basic feelings of the stages before we were born, or childhood, and the ego. So where are you? Okay.
Find out.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm wondering about this ego stage 3 to 4. What I noticed that the ego stage is very, very expandable. You know, you can get enlightened. You can go to courses. You can have a spiritual practice. You can feel very, very connected and have wonderful meditations, and still your ego gets higher. You're not coming anywhere near to 4. Yeah. But it feels like capitalism, you know, it has converted everything into itself.
Yeah.
how do you make this break from that? Because otherwise everything is just your ego, just bigger.
Yeah, yeah. That's a very good observation, and that is true, and that is ego spirituality.
Yeah.
And I can talk about my own life. I did such a course in 2000 and I think it was late 90s. I did an avatar course because my children were born, and I thought I have to work on myself before I give my shit over to my children. So that I did this course, and the way you see that the difference between ego enlightenment and real enlightenment is that after I did this course, I understood life, and I was explaining life to the rest of the people around me. And that is the ego enlightenment. So when you use whatever you have learned for your own benefit, for your own consciousness and your own awareness, as long as you're projecting, you are in the ego. I think that I've taught my children and other people I know. I always say everything is a projection. It's very useful in ego times to look at the world in this way, because where you really look at it, almost everything is a projection in the ego times. So people who are trying to convince other people how enlightened they are and explaining how life is, that is the ego enlightenment. And you see it a lot, because I can recall that I was so inspired by what I learned. I learned something, so it was not without any, but the real core of it, that it had to do with me, that I had to mourn, for example, about things that I experienced in my youth, or I didn't experience in my youth. That was my heart who had to feel. No, it was still projection. Projection is the way to know. Yeah. Other questions? Yes, please.
How do you think the world would look like in stage 4?
Unbearable, probably. Yeah, yeah. Let's assume that's it's a hypothesis. Let's assume that I am in this stage 4. But because it's an integrated model, I still fall back in other stages. I fall back in ego dimensions. I fall back in childish behavior. So it will never be perfect. But it will. Well, I'm interested in experiencing it. I think that what you could see, that a working group in a constellation seminar is, in my view, a group of people who are on that level. And you know why? Because they all live and act and experience in the here and now. When you can see that tomorrow we'll be doing constellations, that a constellation is not just a therapeutic method that we will use, but that you can see that the entire life is a constellation, and then where you relate to life as a constellation. So the question is here, when this is a constellation, how do I feel in this constellation? Where am I? Am I connected to myself here in this constellation? As somebody speaks to you, are you connected to this constellation as a bystander, somebody who hears? When we realize that entire life is a constellation, and I realize that when I'm connected to what I feel, experience in the here and now, and also connected to the bigger group, then we are in that stage. And my experience is, Edu told me about the workshop you had up the Oberstufe in Germany in November. I think that is that feeling of wholeness, that you cannot exactly explain in terms it is like this or it is like that, but it is a feeling of wholeness, which we sometimes experience also in groups. And I think I know this feeling well, and it is a feeling of, it is without effort. You live without effort. And that is, so when I do a workshop of 3 days, I'm not tired. Perhaps a bit tired when I stand, but not in a mental way, because I'm suffering and I'm struggling and I'm trying. It is just being in the here and now. And a work group, constellation work group, is, in my view, one of the only phenomenon in terms of the consciousness model who are really on that stage 4 level. And the nice thing of it is that you can recreate, when we all are aware of this consciousness, we can recreate these constellations everywhere. In a class, in a working environment, in a family, when we learn to look at everything we are in as a constellation. Yes, please.
So, for example, if in a group there are mixed kind of stage 2, more stage 3 or 4, is it correct to say that people who are in stage 4 would be able to raise the others or influence the group that it raises?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think it is what adult energy does, what mature energy does, it always relates to what is going on. So let's assume that an adult person who, the discussion is a bit theoretical, because nobody is in the stage 2 consciousness all the time, but let's assume that somebody is in the stage 2 consciousness. That means, and when he is, let's say, 35, that means quite simply, phenomenologically, that he lives in the past. Yeah, because that's where he still is. He didn't grow out of it. When I relate to that person as I see that is where you are, I bring him to the higher level, because I draw him out of childhood, because I bring the childhood in the here and now. And when I can experience my childhood in the here and now for what it is, then I'm in the present position. Everything that is about presence, that's also Eckhart Tolle has beautiful presentations about it. When you create presence in the here and now, you invite the other without force, without violence, to be in the present. And when you are in the present, you are in the adult position, whatever you feel or where you are. So, and that is, I think that I was in the Theory U program of Otto Scharmer. Some of you probably know him. And we did an exercise with also a group. The learning group was there, and somebody who was giving a lecture, and he was asking everybody to create a very critical mindset in the group towards the person lecturing. And then he said, and he asked, okay, now stop this. And he put somebody else in front of the group, and he said, create a positive attitude towards the lecturer. And you see that what happens is, it's incredible, because we are all, as observers, we are often, me too, we are very critical. We paid something, and who is this guy or this woman that thinks that he knows how life is. So we have, as public, often a very critical attitude to somebody who is saying something. And when we take this positive position, I say, oh, what a nice guy. What he's doing is best. How beautiful he is. How interesting. Then you create an entirely new dynamic in a group. So that is also the power of the individual consciousness. And the challenge, obviously, my challenge also is, I'm not always in the present. Sometimes I'm in the past, or sometimes I'm in the future. With all the jobs I have to take care of this and that. So it is a challenge that will never end. But it is a matter of practice. Practicing, being in the here and now.
Is there a possibility of regression in this model? Or
Yeah, we are continuously. Well, regression happens when I'm having dinner with Edo and she behaves like my mother. It happens all the day with everybody. And I think that the only thing the only stage we can reach is not that we will not regress, because we regress continuously. But the only thing we can reach is that we are aware of the fact that we are regressing. Yeah, we all recognize we regress all the time. And the only thing you can create about regression is being aware of it. Yeah. Yeah. Other questions? From the back. Yes, please.
I apologize, I just arrived, but when I was coming in, you were just mentioning about not being tired at the end of the day or the workshop because of being in the here and now. And I would be interested to hear more about having energy, like doing intensive processes but still having energy. Is it only coming from being in a very conscious state of mind during that process, or is there anything else involved in that? Being that you're aligned to your purpose or whatever else?
Yeah, but words do matter, because aligned to your purpose, that's something that's when I start to wonder whether I'm aligned to my purpose or not, that's where do I want to go, because that's I think what we, when we are in this adult position, we are connected with source energy. And source energy is always in the here and now. And source energy is the source of all life. So we are not burning energy, we are fed by energy, by source energy. And that means that when I'm doing constellations, and also when I'm doing constellations, I have to be able to deal with not knowing. Because when I see something and I know what I see, the chances are that I'm projecting. So I have to deal with not knowing. And when I'm able to deal with not knowing, then I create a space in which something will emerge, which I can observe. And that is easy. But when when you have an education like a therapist, for example, you are trained in transference and countertransference. And transference is the process whereby the client is irritated by you because you remember him of his mother. And countertransference is the process in which the therapist responds to the client because he responds to you as his mother because you remind him of his father. And that are processes that we understand, that we look at this model, that relate to these 2 and 3 consciousness levels. In the adult consciousness, I am only observing. I'm not projecting anymore. I'm observing in the here and now. And that means that I have to be able to stand the not knowing. And also for me, that is still practice. Because my first training course in China, when there are a group of 40 people and you do a constellation and and not seeing anything, it makes you afraid. That's what happens. I'm a professional, so I'm competent. So it is, and those feelings, those regressive feelings will never change. It is, but you can train this awareness of not knowing. And the moment you let go, you can allow the not knowing. It is it is like magic actually, then something emerges. And that's what happens. Is that an answer to your question?
Yes.
Yeah? Other questions?
How was your first experience as a representative in a constellation?
I started to go to constellation seminars, I think about 30 years ago, and I went there because I saw videos from Bert Hellinger, and I was fascinated and inspired what I saw there, because you could not explain what was happening there. And I felt that I was a very mental guy, still also am a mental guy, and I knew that it would learn me to feel my body and learn to understand what my body was saying. And yeah, that's when my life changed. Because when you are in a constellation and you know nothing about the situation at hand, there's nothing you can think of. You cannot project your own images about family onto the constellation, so you can only feel. And I realized, and it was beautiful, that I could feel very well. And yeah, that gave entry to an intelligence. And when we learn to trust the body in whatever it says, we get access to an intelligence that is much quicker than the mind, for example. Yeah. And I think what is also important, it has to do with the fact that it is not tiring, is that you feel that you are a means of another energy. You are a vehicle of other energy. Sometimes when you are in a very traumatic constellation with somebody, half a year ago I was in a constellation of an older man who had a son, and the son was mad, and I was a representative for the son. The physical impact of being mad and moving, and the physical impact of the representation was, it took me a few minutes to get rid of it, but in terms of drama, I was just a vehicle. So, and I think that is what we also learn in these constellations, that whatever a drama emerges, it is not our own drama. And I think that I learned more from the constellation that I was a representative in than my own constellations. So that is a very, I think that is one of the beautiful things of this work, that we have this very deep way of experiencing knowledge, which is universal. Yeah. So that's what it meant to me. Yes?
I have a curiosity, because I'm not very familiar with constellations. I've only attended one. And I want to ask if this kind of thing can have a negative impact on participants. Like, for example, if there's someone with a big trauma in there, and you can amplify their own.
Yeah, I think the answer is easy. That any incompetent behavior can damage people. Yeah, so. I think the beauty of this specific form of therapy is, and that is, we can also relate therapy to the model. When we look at therapy like it emerged in society around 1900 by foregoers like Freud and Jung, they were doctors. They were doctors with a hierarchical position, which was expressed by the white coat they had, as somebody with knowledge and with the other hierarchical position than the client. So the therapist was an expert and the client was somebody who didn't have this knowledge. And in this relationship, the therapeutic interaction was an expression of the stage 2 consciousness. You see that in the level 3 consciousness, so the modernity, you see that the client and the customer or the patient is getting more and more influence. When you look at a hospital, that often the patient knows more about the illness than the doctor. So you see that the ego is becoming more and more important, and we are more customers of a therapist, and we buy services, and it is very difficult to let us help, to act as a child and let you be carried. In the 4-stage therapeutic form, and that is the constellation, I have no pretense anymore about what the truth is. I don't think, oh, I see her and she has an issue with her mother. It's not my projection. Even if it's based on sound knowledge, it's not my projection. I observe what is going on in the constellation. So there's much more distance between what is happening. And then again, things that can happen, and I think they have to do with the fact that the person who constellates is projecting things, is forcing things in the constellation that are not there. I think the perspective on trauma of the leap process is very simple and true, and that is that we always convince people that however big the trauma is, and that is very difficult in the consciousness 3 position, where the patient is as powerful as the patient that says, I'm traumatized, and it is the doctor has no position anymore to dispute that we say, however big the trauma is over. And the specific constellation method makes it possible for you to stand in the adult position, to see the traumatized child, and feel the difference between the child over there and the adult here, who observes the child, and the child who experiences the trauma. And in a classical therapeutic setting, when you are lying on this couch and you're talking about your traumatic experiences, we can imagine that I am as an adult person, and when I'm talking about this trauma, it is much more difficult to distinguish between the story I'm telling and the person who is telling the story. And in this method, we have divorced these two identities, and that makes the model very stable, is my experience. So I cannot and that does not mean that it cannot be a tough process, but it's a process in which we always invite the adult to take responsibility, ownership of what happened, and when the adult is not able to do that, then we stop the constellation. Yeah. Yes, please.
Did you say at the end, when the adult is not able to
take ownership of, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. When it's too much and the client is overwhelmed.
Yeah. Yeah. In China, because consciousness development is increasing fast, obviously, but it is different. Sometimes the adult in a constellation in China is so much in a trauma still that he wants to run over to the child, and so he cannot disidentify with the child. But also in more in simpler forms, I had a constellation this spring with a woman who was very much experienced in constellation work, was a high-skilled professional, and did the LIP for the first time. And she had a person on the one who was beautiful. She was very much inspired and impressed by her own source. And she was so much inspired that she wanted to go. That was a positive identification, that she wanted to embrace her. Also, how beautiful you are. Not realizing that what you see is what you are. So it is you, what you see. So, and when you trying to grasp it, then you lose it, because so that is the unique shape of this model, that you have all those identities who are part of the current you in separate places in the constellation. Yeah. Other questions?
So I'm not sure if the subject was touched before, because
Yeah.
But could you tell us the comparison between this type of constellation and classical family constellations, or why is this method better?
Well, perhaps you can understand that the observation that this method is better will never emerge in this because we have no. It's not a hierarchical model, so we have no observation about. But when you look at the differences, there are two main differences. I would say that the main difference is that it's position 3. The classical constellation work that Hellinger developed is the constellation work where you get back your position into the family system. So when there was a trauma, we heal the constellation and we say, okay, you get your place in front of your father and mother, and now you're okay again. We don't do that. We don't try to resolve anything that was what happened in the past, and we just observe it for what it was. And for that we need this 3 position, because this adult position, this youth position, in emotional sense, not a biological sense, it says that yes, I am your child. Yes, I'm grateful that I got my life through you. But, for example, no, I cannot be in touch anymore because the relationship with you was too destructive. So it is this 3 position that, in my experience, was the part of the work that Wilfried Nelles defined, that gave the missing link that I found in the classical constellation work, which I always thought I had a very difficult relationship with my mother, and I felt it was totally true what Hellinger said, but let go of all your convictions about your parents, because they gave you life. So you have to, that was the constellation where you bow in front of your parents and say, oh, thank you for life. But I said there is something more. And that something more was, yeah, but sometimes you need your ego, your young ego or older ego, to take you apart from a toxic family relationship and say, yeah, I'm grateful for life, but no, I'm not in touch with you anymore. And I think that are the 2 main differences. We're not going to repair anything in the past, and the ego is something. So yes, you can step away from your family and try to shape your own life. Yeah. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Where is a masculine, feminine person in this role or in this model? So, like a woman who has made success in a man's world. Where is she? What's the role she's playing?
I think that in that model we don't, the masculine and the feminine just play a role in this sense, that we know and we experience and we exercise with that. With something we could do, for example, tomorrow and the days after, is that we that we know that the masculine and the feminine is in every person. And that's the only thing we know. And that there is a biological identity that you have. And Wilfried Nelles has written a new version of his older book, Männer, Frauen und die Liebe, which will be translated in English perhaps in the coming months, in which he says something about the gender ideology, about whether you can choose a sexual identity just by your own personal conviction, and because you have the conviction that you are born in the wrong body. That is not something that we see in constellations like this. Some people, there is a misunderstanding that could have to do with the fact that I'm born as a twin and I've lost an identity in an early stage of my biological life. But we don't see that, we don't believe in a phenomenological way that you are born in the wrong body. So that is not something we see. But we work a lot with male and female identities, and they are neutral. So the strong woman is as fine as the feminine woman. Where does your question stem from? What is the background of your question?
Because there is, you know, when you go at the office, you're very much, you need to be determined, driven, doing the task, so you're very much in that energy. And then you go dancing, and I went dancing, and it was a tango class, and I just could not let myself be driven, be led in the dance. And in tango, you cannot lead as a woman.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So I thought, I am so much of my day in that masculine energy, and then I want to be somewhere else doing dancing. I love dancing, and I can't. And then I was wondering, am I deficient or?
No, I think I know many women who have big jobs. My own partner is one. And they all pay a price, because when we are realistic, we can see that the management profile we want from women is a masculine profile, about dedication and goal orientation and being able to take decisions. And I think it's wonderful that emancipation brought us the possibility for women to create a career, to earn a lot of money, and to be the CEO of a big company. But they all pay a price, and by doing so, we all pay a price. Because we lose. Who am I to say that? Let's take that into account. But we lose real femininity as a value that has an existential benefit to society. And I see that many women in the Netherlands, all the women I know with big jobs, they pay a price. Yeah. And I think then tangoing is a very good balancing of this identity, but I can fully understand that when you're stepping away only a few minutes ago or half an hour ago of this masculine management identity, then tangoing is you need a few more hours probably to arrive back in your feminine identity. Yeah, that is really something that is said, that there's hardly in the modern world, in the modern Western world, there's hardly an intrinsic admiration of the feminine identity. So we have an admiration for women who take a masculine identity, but women who don't. No, that's something So in the end, we will all be like the two people I talked about before, with the same suits and the same color, and that's not something I'm looking forward to. Yeah. And what we at least also see when we look at the source of life in the stage 1 is that the ability of life to differentiate, the fact that life differentiates between an egg and a sperm, and a man differentiates between himself and a woman, is the life-bringing concept. That's what we learn when we look at this stage 1. So it's differentiation that is life-bringing, and it is homogenization which is killing everything. Other questions? Yes, please.
Can I please ask you to elaborate a bit on how you work with the system or organization?
Well, what we'll do tomorrow and the coming days is that we will use the model, but just as a frame of reference. When you would have a problem with your boss and a colleague, we would not use the model at all, but just put these participants in the constellation. And what we sometimes see is that they intuitively take a position in the model on a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And sometimes we use the model because obviously there are stages of life in organizations as well. It is, for example, important that, let me give an example, when there is a hospital which was started 120 years ago with nuns who had a religious inspiration, and when we get rid of this inspiration 100 years later because we want to be a modern hospital with a neutral name and not St. Mary or something hospital, then we cut off the energy of the source as well. So also in organizations we could do a lip constellation with the organization itself at the adult position and looking back at all the stages the organizations went through. So the model is a frame of reference which is sometimes explicitly used, sometimes used by the constellation itself intuitively, and sometimes not used at all. But that we use the stages of life also for organizations, that is for sure. But then what you often see is that people with organization questions come to the conclusion that the organization question is often a personal question. It is always very often a derivative of something that is personal. And that brings us back to the conclusion about which is the way we go. The way we go is our own process of consciousness development. And that is not the development of something we do, that is opening up to the stream of life and getting rid of the barriers. That's what you can do. Yeah. And you can see that I'm interested to see if you think that Romania, for example, or Transylvania has examples of adult organizations. But in my view, the big majority, 90 to 95% of the organizations are in this stage 2 with a clear identity, belonging to the group. What do you think about church, clothing, buildings, army, stages, hierarchy, and some are determined by rationality, but that's all we see. And that also explains why many people become independent professionals, because they do not fit in this model anymore. So when the price becomes too high, then you get out of it. Yeah. And it leads to a situation where hospitals don't have no personnel anymore. You see that everybody is running out of because the environments have become so toxic and so complicated that everybody wants to go. This is the world we have created.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
So I understand that you observe that most of the existing organizations would be anywhere between 2 and 3 mostly.
Yeah.
did you get the feeling of what an organization or a system at the consciousness level of 4 would look like? Some traits of that.
Well, what I said before, I think that the organization, obviously we have to realize that we need organizations on the level 2. When we have a railroad company, for example, we don't want them to invent every day again which track they are going to drive. So we need a lot of structure in our life. So these organizations are fine, they are important. But they have disadvantages, that's a problem. And the only concrete, sheer organization shape that I think is the constellation. Because it is in the here and now. And the nice thing of this, I was writing about it today, the interesting thing is that I have the same question with a different group in a different 1 kilometer on and on a different time, the same question will lead to an entire new constellation. And at the same time, the interesting thing is that everybody experiences the constellation, experiences as something that resonates very much in the here and now. But just in the here and now. A minute later and it's gone. But the strange thing is that we want to, in this stage 3 rationality concept, we want to control everything and we want to maintain it. And we learn in constellations that the more subjective the experience is, and the more time-related and the more subjective the relation is, I experience in this constellation, here and now, on this place, that the impact thereof is much bigger than these huge structures that we create. And that is interesting. So it is in the moment, in the here and now, where I learn something that I could not learn when I would stay in the library for 6 months. And that is totally counterintuitive to how we live. To how we learn, how we work, by repeating everything. So I would say only the constellation is a level 4 or 5 organization, shape of organization. And there are many other forms that we could, there are many issues in societies that we could help with creating constellations. And when you have a practical issue in a neighborhood or in a country, create a constellation about it. It doesn't resolve everything, but it is something that people who have experienced this gives it a truth and a deepness that is not experienced in a different way. Yeah.
Okay, I think one more question.
Yeah.
Okay. You touched a bit this topic earlier, but from your experience with leadership teams, what will be the best way to move from a head perspective to a more heart and soul perspective?
Well, I did this psychology master's degree in Institut in close to Paris. And there my teacher, Manfred Kester-Vries, told me, you always have to meet the client where he or she is. And I think that comes back to being in the present. And comes back to also ego leadership and inspired leadership. I can only help you with your leadership when I'm totally connected to where you are. And what you see with many leadership experts, they are projecting their views on how a real leader is on you. And then you start to feel uncomfortable because that's not who I am. And then it relates to something your parents told you because you're not good enough. And then you start to work hard. But the only thing that leadership is that I confirm you, praise you exactly where you are. I think the core message of leadership, because from 2019 to 2021 I was Secretary General of a region with 1,000 employees, and I had a speech there, and I talked with these people about love, which is quite atypical. That my inspiration was to create an organization where love is also a topic. And 10 years before I would have said, well, not do this. But people just need confirmation. The main message as a leader I convey to people is, you are okay. That's everything they need. And then they start to flourish. It's very easy.
I feel like I have this challenge now. I work with management team, and I feel like there is a distance between my perspective and how I position myself and the other men that are positioned.
Yeah, when you're dependent of people, I compare life with a traffic light. We spend a lot of time in our working environments and a family relationship with orange. Shall I stay? Shall I work harder? Instead of going to green and say, okay, I take ownership of that. Whatever, I'm not responsible, but I take ownership. Or I put a boundary. I say, no, I'm not going here. But we are spending a lot of energy, 80 to 90% of our time on orange. And the basics that we learn in this leap process, in the adult position, is to distinguish much earlier, in an intuitive way, I'll take green or red. I go, or I take ownership. Not spending time on orange. And it feels like you are in orange. Yeah. And obviously, it is also my experience that I've spent a lot of my time in orange, by the way. And so that is the challenge of life. But what we can learn is to really feel in our heart because internally you know what the situation is. That you have to go. It feels like you have to go. And that sometimes that is a difficult truth to swallow. And sometimes we have no choices because we have a mortgage and we have a family and we have to earn money. But then you can go to green and say, okay, I take ownership of it. It's not nice. I dislike it, but I take ownership of it. It sounds easier than it is, I know, but this is my life experience. Yeah. Thank you all.